Hi, this is Andre. We're going to have another look at using live looping in digital audio workstation production. Thank you very much to Nakarin Teeranepun for commissioning this one. We've looked at a few different ways of integrating live looping into production, but what we haven't looked at yet is what is arguably the most common and most easily accessible way of doing it in modern production, which is starting with a production in a DAW and then synchronizing a looper to the DAW using the DAW as a clock master. So what I've done here is I started with this track. This is a work in progress, and it basically was just this. I'm going to play just the skeleton of the idea here. I'm going to mute everything other than that. So that's it. It's basically a one-bar loop that changes a little bit. I was using a contact instrument called Cathedral of Junk, and it has this strange arpeggiation thing with some randomness built into it so that it doesn't quite repeat in exactly the same way. And I'm always a big fan of stuff that loops but doesn't quite loop in exactly the same way. So this is just my starting idea. It's basically a one-measure idea with very slight variation as it repeats. And it's a work in progress, as I say, so I have no idea what's going to happen with it. What I did was to synchronize the EDP up to Logic using Logic as the clock master. And if you're using the Echoplex Digital Pro, you need to use MIDI clock. So I'm now going to embarrass myself by trying to work through the various preferences of Logic, which is kind of a labyrinth in itself. But what I ended up doing, here we go, MIDI sync project settings. And what I did was for MIDI clock, which you see there, it was transmitting to the Mio, which is the MIDI interface that I use. It's just a one-in, one-out USB interface. And I had MIDI clock set to transmit out through the Mio. And then I had the Mio running into the EDP, and I had the EDP set to sync in. If you're using the EDP specifically, you need to use MIDI clock. The EDP will not receive MIDI timecode, unfortunately. So if you want to do MIDI sync with the EDP, your DAW has to be sending MIDI clock. So that's how we configured it. If you look down here at this region, this is about 11 minutes of me jamming. This is just one take of the EDP while I was recording. So the signal chain here was that Logic was sending MIDI sync to the EDP. I then had an audio output from the EDP coming back into Logic and recording it on a new audio track. And this is basically just 11 minutes of me improvising. This is not 11 minutes of usable material, because I can guarantee you that there's a lot of dead space in here and a lot of time in between whatever good ideas may be here. And to be honest, as I'm recording this right now, I have not listened back to this. I've listened to a few seconds because I wanted to do some denoising to get rid of a little bit of background hiss, which I do with pretty much all my EDP recordings, but I haven't actually sat down and gone through this. So part of what this video is going to do is kind of look at the process of weeding down this stuff. You know, it's 11 minutes of basically raw material, 11 minutes of me throwing stuff against the proverbial wall. And what we're doing right now is seeing what sticks. So what we're going to do is actually listen through this. I don't know if I'm going to do the entire 11 minutes in the final video that goes live, but I'm going to record it. And this is basically me going to be hearing it for the first time, because generally when I'm doing this kind of work, I try to not listen to it right after I've done it. You know, in general, when I'm recording, I try not to listen right back to a take. And especially if I'm doing stuff like this particular performance where I'm kind of recording and improvising and jamming at the same time, I try to give myself enough time to forget what I have in there. And the reason for that is that it's very easy to kind of get into minuscule rabbit hole obsessive editing mode with a digital audio workstation and just zero in on every perceived mistake and every perceived flaw. And what I found is that if I give myself a little bit of time between recording and listening back, then I've been able to forget about a lot of the details. I've forgotten about all the stuff that I thought was a mistake when I tracked it. And it's the closest I can come to having some kind of objectivity. I'm never going to have complete objectivity over it because I'm the person who recorded it and created it in the first place. But it gives me a bit of a kind of, sort of, not really exactly, a little bit of a clean slate and a fresh perspective to review it. So this is the first time I'm going to check it out. There will probably be a lot of embarrassing surprises here, maybe some good stuff too. What I'm going to do is play it right from the start And as I hear bits that I like, hopefully I will hear bits that I like, I'm going to kind of walk through the process of how I go about editing that stuff, marking it for later use and all that. So I'm going to be quiet and we're going to play it. Okay, so it's right around here, right around bar 10. And of course, one of the nice things about synchronizing the EDP to the DAW is that all the Echoplex developments happen very easily on beats and bars, so it's very easy to edit the stuff. So right around beat 10 is where I felt like it started getting interesting. And if you actually look at this, I have the playhead right on beat 10, and you can see that this first attack is lining up just before beat 10, which means it's a little ahead of the beat, which is not a bad thing necessarily. And the original loop itself is kind of lumpy and lopsided. It's definitely not a very quantized feel. So I don't mind that it's a little ahead of the beat in that regard. It actually, you know, it would not surprise me if a lot of the stuff on this take does not line up very cleanly as far as being right on the grid. So what I'm going to do is edit it here. Let's edit it here, just so we don't cut off that first region. I'm doing an edit here because this is about where the good stuff starts happening for me. So I'm going to play it from here. All right, so right around here, it started changing up. So I'm going to go back a measure, and I'm going to make an edit mark. And I'm going to color code the region that we just isolated. I liked it. I wasn't crazy about it, but it wasn't bad. So I'm going to give it kind of a neutral color. So I open up Show Hide Colors. Let's give that like... No, I didn't want to move that. Come on. Let's give that, I don't know, kind of a an orangish. How's that? Yeah, it's okay. It's aight. And now I'm going to keep listening. It's at this point that it started changing enough with the overdubs that it kind of became something different enough that I want to delineate it as a separate section. So let's keep listening from there. So this is fine. Nothing is really grabbing me hugely, so I'm going to try and play through it until I hear something that I really think is worth hanging on to. So I'm going to keep playing for a bit. And that sounds a lot better to me. So I'm going to make another edit mark here. Start playing from 22. And then this is a part where you can see it basically fades out to silence. So this is where I brought feedback all the way down, which I did a few times during this jam just to clear the slate. So that's kind of a natural endpoint for that. So now we have that second region, which I liked. I liked it a little more than the first one, so I'm going to give it a slightly hotter color. And let's keep going. I'm going to skip a bit of this dead space here, and I'm going to start playing right from where it looks like the next layers started getting added in. Okay, so I guess I didn't bring feedback down because, as you can hear, that was pretty much the same loop as what was going on here, so I don't remember what happened there, but not crazy about that. I don't think there's anything going on in those few measures that I've got to hang on to. So I'm going to keep going. Let's start from 39. Yeah, and this is a great example of stuff that, I don't particularly need to have in there. I mean, I guess it's cool to have weird sounds, but the whole process of doing something like this, of kind of jamming against a DAW and improvising, is about creating raw material for myself. And in the nature of doing that, you're going to end up with a lot of dead space and a lot of periods where I'm building stuff up and kind of exploring ideas and experimenting with stuff, and a lot of stuff that just doesn't really need to show up in a final product. If I'm looking at DAW production especially, I'm not thinking so much in terms of having like a continuous, unedited, unadulterated EDP live performance. I like doing that sort of thing, and there's a part of me that likes documenting that, but I kind of feel like that's a whole separate category than DAW production. So when I said at the beginning that we do not have 11 minutes of usable material, this is exactly what I mean. We're already like almost 2 minutes into it, and we've isolated probably less than 30 seconds of stuff that I would consider like really usable raw material, and that's fine. Sometimes you will get several minutes of usable material out of an extended jam. Sometimes you get a few seconds. Sometimes you might not get anything at all. It's just kind of the nature of throwing the stuff against the wall. I keep using that analogy, but it makes the most sense because it's literally trying stuff, seeing how it sounds, and then experimenting around with it. And inevitably, you will either get stuff that doesn't sound great, or you might come up with stuff that does sound good, but doesn't fit into the track that you're working on. And that's just the nature of doing this kind of work, the nature of doing this kind of production and performance. So I'm going to shut up now and we'll keep listening. There was one bit in there that was kind of interesting. Let me see if I can find that again. So let's isolate that. Give that a moderate color code. Very nice. And that didn't really go anywhere, so I'm going to skip over to here. Okay, so that's kind of cool. So let me see where it starts sounding like actual music. Right around here. So I'm going to isolate that, and we'll see how long it seems to maintain interest while basically being that same kind of idea. Okay, so right around 60, 61, it starts going into some different enough territory that I would consider that a different musical idea, a different building block. So I'm going to cut off the end of this particular part of it somewhere where it seems to kind of, before it changes direction, just so I can isolate that as a separate idea. So let's go back a few bars. Yeah, where that low note comes in is kind of where it starts turning a corner. So I'm going to isolate that region. I like that, so give it a slightly hotter color, and keep going for measure 58. Yeah, I mean, there's a fair amount of development going on there, but nothing night and day. So I would say when that high harmonic comes in right after measure 67 is where that shifts gears. So I'm going to make an edit point there. I'm going to select that region and, give it about the same temperature of evaluation. Let's keep going from 67. Yeah, this is okay. Let's isolate the part right before the little slidey high harmonic, which is right there. So let's edit at measure 69. Ha ha ha. Color code that. and keep going from there. Yeah, this overall area, there's not a huge amount of dramatic, obvious development, but I like it well enough. And it seems to really change when those low harmonics come in. So I'm going to make the edit point right before that. Actually, let's do it one measure before, just because, like I say, some of the looping and some of my playing on this is a little ahead of the beat. And color code that. And let's look a little further ahead. Yeah, so there was a whole stretch there. It sounds like I brought feedback down at that point. Nothing that really caught my ear too much, so I'm basically going to pass on that stuff and keep going from 93, where the next bit seems to come in. Yeah, I already like that a lot more than the section before that. So let's sure, let's cut it at 93. It's probably a little early in development, but why not? I'm gonna mark this in a very dark color, this region, because I didn't really care for it. My mind may always change, but as you're probably guessing by now, I try and make a lot of decisions early in the process. I try to not leave myself too many rabbit holes to get lost in, because I have definitely been guilty of that in the past, and it's still a possibility. So I'm basically color coding stuff. If we zoom out a little bit, if we look at the entire thing thus far, it's already whittling down a lot of stuff. This is at 3 minutes 49, so about 30% through the entire improv. So we can look at that stuff as being pretty good. That stuff is not particularly good. That stuff is being aight. So already we're doing a pretty decent job of whittling stuff down. And if we look ahead, there's still quite a bit more to go through. I don't think I'm going to put the entire final unedited exploration on YouTube, but I'm going to keep venturing ahead and see what I can see. All right, that's the part we already heard a bit of, so I'm going to go forward a few bars into the later development of it. Okay, so I like that quite a bit, and it kind of changes with that high harmonic that came in right at bar 105. So I'm going to mark off 104, give that a color code, keep going. Okay, so here again with that low harmonic, that definitely is kind of the beginning of a new section and a new scene. So I wasn't too into the stuff that was happening prior to that, so let's make an edit point right at 113. And I'm going to color code that as being not so hot, and we'll keep going from 113. Yeah, that's kind of cool. It's around 120 that it changes direction. Yeah, with that little... So let's say 121 is where that development ends. It's okay. Let's give it a moderately hot color. And keep going a little bit. Okay, so I really like what starts happening around 123, so I'm going to mark that off. Start it from 123. Yeah, this is my favorite thing that I've heard from the session so far. And as you probably heard, there were several measures in a row where I wasn't doing anything different to the loop. And usually if I'm improvising and I stumble across something that I really like, then I will let it repeat several times in a row without doing anything else to it, just to make it easier for me to do what I'm doing right now, which is extract parts of the original source improv and use them as building blocks. So let's see how far I let that go before I added anything else to it. Okay, and then I reversed it, so let's cut it off at 133. I'm going to give that a bright red thing because I like it. And let's see how it sounded once I reversed it. So there was a little thing there. I think I must have been doing some kind of stuttery thing with the insert button by accident. I think it was at 136. Let's see. Yeah, I like that a lot. Happy accident. So let's take like 4 bars of that. 134 to 138. Well, we'll take 3 measures of it. 134 to 137. Give that a moderate color. Keep going. This is sounding okay. I'm going to backtrack a little bit. All right, so let's take it from 145 and do a few bars. Okay, so from 145 to about 150, and that's a section, this is a little different from previous regions we've looked at just because there's a fair amount of development and evolution going on that I think works as a continuous thing. It's not like rambling around to find stuff. I feel like the development actually works pretty well as its own musical idea. Let's just listen to that again. Yeah, so that was pretty good. So let's give that a relatively hot rating. And we are now 6.5 minutes through the whole tune. So we're more than halfway through the track. And if you just look here, the stuff that's relatively brightly colored, you've got these regions here. that there, that there, that there, that there. So we've been able to whittle this down a lot. I would say this is probably, if I take all the regions that I thought were pretty good contenders thus far, probably no more than like 2 or 3 minutes at most, which is good, because a lot of this is about narrowing down the ideas and finding what's useful. And conceptually, I mean, this is still a work in progress, but I don't see this as being some extended like 10 or 20 minute epic. I kind of like the idea of this being a very short, to the point, 3-minute thing, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. So for the purposes of that, it's really about going through the original source improv and kind of cherry picking it and finding the stuff that seems to work the very best for me. So I still have about 5 minutes to go. And I'm not going to put that on the video because I think you've gotten the idea by now. But this is a good example of another way of using live looping. And again, it's probably the most common way at this point, just because a fair number of looping devices have MIDI sync inputs, or a lot of people are looping strictly on software. So you could be using Mobius or Echo Loop or any other number of software solutions and do this all inside the box. It's another approach. It's another way of doing things. And I should also mention that having the ongoing synchronization is important. Even if you get the EDP starting at exactly the same time as the track, at exactly the same tempo, if there is not ongoing synchronization between them, if Logic is not sending ongoing clock to the EDP, then it is extremely likely that they're going to drift eventually. So even if I could like preset the exact same tempo on the EDP and start recording, we would find by the time we got in here, I can almost guarantee that the EDP would have drifted just from minuscule variations in clock. It has nothing to do with the EDP or with Logic. That's just the nature of the beast when you have things going for a while and they are not continuously synchronized. So I don't know how much of this is actually going to make it to the outside world, but this is a good example of one particular approach I take. If I really, really liked everything that had gone on here, then I could potentially just use that as a foundation for something and have some program stuff happening underneath that, developing or not. For me, like I say, conceptually, the original 1-bar loop that's the conceptual foundation for whatever this piece ends up being. So I'm thinking about the EDP in this case as basically being a supplement to that and basically following that kind of aesthetic as an ingredient in whatever recipe for whatever meal this ends up being. So to be continued, perhaps. I don't know if we will ever hear anything from this outside of this video, but it was an interesting experiment. Thank you again to Nakarin Teeranepun for commissioning this, and thank you for tuning in. I always appreciate it. I will talk to you guys very soon. Bye-bye.